Welcome to Live from My Drum Room, the Modern Drummer podcast, and please welcome my guest today, truly a legend, and I'm not using that term loosely, truly a legend, Mr. Lorne Wheaton, Lorne Gump Wheaton. Lorne,
Hey, John.
how you doing,
How
buddy?
are you, buddy?
I'm good. I'm
I'm
good.
good. You?
I'm good. It's
We'll
great to
try
see
not to
you.
talk over each other doing this.
No, well, I'm going to let you do all the talking. I probably should have told you that. You're going to be doing all the
Oh, no,
talking
no,
today.
no, no. No, I'll take questions, but no, it's good to see you, man.
It's good to see you too. It's been a minute. I want to say probably um, maybe at a NAMM show some years ago. Maybe might have been the last time I got to see you in person. Um,
It might have been the last NAMM show that we were both at, I would think. I'm not sure what year that was. I remember the last one I was at, I got very sick. I was living with Billy Morgan, our friend Billy Morgan, and he was kind enough to put me into his room for the 3 days that I was there. And I'm not sure what year it was. It could very well have been 2015, maybe.
ah,
But I
okay.
got very sick with whatever flu. It was
Yeah.
pre-COVID, of course, and I spent 2 of the 3 days in the room in bed on his pull-out couch in his room, and that was my NAMM experience. And I couldn't have
Ah,
got out of there any faster, believe me.
I
But
know,
that
man.
might have been the last time we saw each other in person.
Well, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, that sounds about right. I had already left Zildjian, but I was, I was going every year. And the last, I would say probably the last 10 or so years, we could talk about NAMM all day, and I promise we won't, but the last 10 or so years of going to that show, or maybe even more, I think all of us would come home with like this awful, flu that you couldn't shake for weeks.
Nam Namthrax. Namthrax is
Namthrax.
what we called it.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, man. It was
So,
like,
and
yeah.
everybody dealt with it because it's such a social thing,
Yeah.
and you get people from all around the globe coming, and what dragging whatever germs they're dragging, and pandemic was never in anybody's minds back then.
I know.
But you would just get the flu, or you would get some kind of cold or something like that. And it wasn't very often that you didn't come back from Anaheim and you didn't have something going on.
Yeah. And it seemed like, excuse me, this is just pollen right now, but it seemed like it would hang on too for like weeks, like worse than a
Yeah,
lot of colds you'd get, and um,
yeah, yeah.
but but it's good to see you, buddy. And I want to, I know we'll talk about this too. You've had an incredible career. I think about, you started talking a little bit about this off the air, and you kind of answered a question I wanted to ask you, which is when did you start, um, working for bands, whether it be, as a drum tech or as a crew guy? Like, when did that all start for you?
My interest started when I was in high school, and that would have been 14, 15. Not necessarily interested in the industry, but I was a fan of
Yeah,
of a lot of bands that were coming out of England. First of all, the Beatles, and then the Who, and it just progressed from there.
sure. Yeah,
So I was going to high school, and I was doing my best to go into high school. My mother was pretty proud of me at the time, but a lot of people have difficulty going to school, and when your mind is elsewhere.
sure. Yeah,
But I volunteered with being, they would have the school dances, and we also had a coffee shop that they would have bands come in and play, neighborhood bands, Toronto bands, just to keep the kids off the street and getting in trouble. So my high school, George Vanier High School, was in the same neighborhood as a few other high schools around the area, which happened to be the high school that Getty and Alex went to. And this is back when John Rutsey was the drummer.
okay.
So, as I said, I would volunteer. I would volunteer for the school dances, help them bring in the gear, not necessarily do anything after that because they were pretty much on their own. They'd set up their own stuff. I can't even remember if they even had somebody back then. I know Ian Grandy came in. He was the original front of house guy, sound guy. And I'm not sure when he actually started, but they're pretty much on your own. You're carrying your own gear in the back of a station wagon or whatever. So I volunteered to do that. So that's where I met Getty and Alex the first time. And then it kind of progressed to a couple of years later, getting hooked up and still kind of being in high school, but wishing I really wasn't at the time, which was, not the best of ideas.
Yeah, yeah.
And my mother didn't agree with that at all, but I ended up getting hired by a Toronto band named Gatto, which kind of, they started paying me, I can't even remember what it was. I think it might have been $50 a week or something, but $50 was more than I had.
Yeah.
If I wasn't doing it. So we started touring, and it kind of grew pretty quickly. They were doing the clubs and high schools, the same thing that I was doing when I was at high school. But I decided to go that route, and that's where it all kind of started.
Yeah. So to just jump backwards a second, when you met Alex and Getty, the two of the founding members of Rush, were they playing covers or were they playing their own music at that point? Like when you
Oh,
were,
yeah, they were playing covers.
they were playing covers.
Uh,
A three-piece band back then too, or
yeah,
yeah, okay.
I think they just had turned back into a three-piece because they actually at one point were a four-piece at
Keyboards
one time, and I'm
or
not
another
sure.
guitar.
I think it was.
Excuse me.
I'm not sure whether it was a singer. It might have
Okay.
been a singer, or possibly. I'd have to go into the books of Rush to find that out because it's everywhere. People have gone very in depth with Rush's history. But it was three-piece, and John Rutsey was definitely the drummer at the time. And like I said, Getty and Alex both went to a neighborhood high school, just not my high school. So you'd see these people every once in a while,
Sure.
hanging
Yeah.
out,
Yeah.
whatever.
This is cool. I had no idea that your history went back that far with Getty and Alex. Until
Yeah.
yeah, that's incredible to have you,
And
come
the
into
full
the fold.
circle of,
Yeah.
yeah, the full circle of starting to work with him, one-on-one with Neil, especially in 2001, was a full circle for me. So it was kind of interesting, but through so many years, late 70s into the 80s, we did so much work when I was with the support act Max Webster under the same management. We did so many Rush tours that it was all one big family anyways.
Yeah.
We all knew each other by that point. So it was very cool, and it was a lot of fun back in those days. It was difficult sometimes, but they made it more fun for us, and they really loved Max Webster. It was a good double bill.
I'll bet. Yeah. And the management company was Anthem Entertainment. Was that, if I remember correctly?
Yeah,
Or yeah,
and actually, it would have been SRO back then, SRO management. Anthem, I think, came from when they started the record company.
I see. Okay. Yeah.
So it turned into SRO Anthem. But since then, it's back to SRO management. But it was always Ray Daniels, and Vic Wilson was his partner back then. And Max Webster was one of their acts, along with a handful of others. But we did a lot of touring with Rush,
That's
so we were
cool.
one big family.
And
It
so
was
you
very
had,
cool.
yeah, and you had this history with Neil going back well before you worked with him. So there was,
Yeah,
my little experience that I had with Neil was that, he really had to trust you, and he obviously trusted you. I mean, you became his, really his right arm, by my estimation. I think about it, and as I say, we'll get into that a little bit more, but you worked for Steve Smith and Journey in the '80s, if I remember correctly, right?
yes,
Was that your first
yeah.
sort of big major tour?
Yes, it was.
Yeah,
Aside from the shows we were doing with Max and Rush,
yeah,
which would have been arenas a lot of the times, but this was a stadium tour, and I was out with a band called April Wine, working with Jerry Mercer, and we were doing a bunch of these in the 80s, early 80s. They would have these World Series of Rock festivals that they would take over a lot of the baseball stadiums, and there'd be, you know, Sammy Hagar, Journey, Ted Nugent, all these bands kind of did all these things. And I was with April Wine at the time, and we just happened to be, I think we were in St. Louis at the ballpark there, and Journey, I think, were headlining, or one of the headliners. It could have been a few different co-headline kind of things. Mm-hmm. And I met a few of the guys from Journey, one being Benny Collins, who was Steve's drum tech at the time, who eventually moved on to be their production manager, and eventually moved on to be production manager for many people, mm-hmm. including Michael Jackson, and I think they even did the Stones for a while. But he has passed away, rest in peace, Benny. But I did this show with him, and a couple of days later, we were continuing on with April Wine doing shows, and I got a phone call from their management asking me if I'd be interested in meeting up with them, because we were headed out to the West Coast, and we were playing a gig in either San Francisco or Oakland with April Wine. I'm not sure whether we were headlining. I think we probably were, because they were doing pretty good in the States at the time. Mm-hmm. And a couple of the guys, Benny one, and one of the managers came out to somewhat check me out and interview me and see if I was interested in doing such a thing. And I was blown away by even the interest. Yeah, I got hired, and they had a massive stadium tour that they were about to embark on, which was Frontiers. And so they wanted me to come in and do rehearsals to start off. They flew me out to Oakland, to their warehouse, figured out what I was using, what gear was. That was when I first met John Good. He showed up with one of the first versions of the DW pedals, which were from the Camco era somewhat.
Yeah.
And that's when I'm pretty sure Steve started using his pedals at that point. But that's where I met John Good the first time.
That's incredible.
Long time ago.
Yeah,
no
man.
Drums had ever been produced by DW at that point.
Yeah,
it was all I think they came up with a throne at the start, and then they moved from there, and pedals and the such, and hardware. But we started there, and I did that tour, and it was a massive tour, massive learning curve. Being out on the road with, at that point there was 3 crew buses and 7 semis, which is small compared to what people tour with these days. But we made it happen, and we were filling up the stadiums everywhere, man, and doing multiple nights in arenas if we were in an arena. So it was quite the experience. And I loved working with Steve. I learned so much from Steve. He became a very good friend. He ended up being my best man when I was married in Hawaii. Wow. At the end of the tour. And all the guys showed up at we were just at City Hall getting married, of course, but they all showed up, and it was just a great family, and I love Steve.
Oh, that's
we go
fantastic.
Way back.
I know he always spoke highly of you. I remember at some point, maybe, it's so hard to keep dates straight, but I remember again back at a NAMM show, Steve was doing something for Sonar, and I think you worked for him, or you were I remember you guys had sort of a reunion. I remember coming over and seeing Steve, and you guys were hanging, and he said, and I already knew this anyway, but he said, Lorne and I go back to, the 80s. He was my first, big drum tech or whatever, and you could see that there's that bond with you guys. It's really cool. Yeah.
Well, we both did Journey, and then he decided to take a leave of absence and focus on Vital Information, which was his jazz band.
Yeah.
And some serious heavyweight players, and Dean Brown, and just killer band. So there was a couple of handpicked people from the Journey crew that decided to move on with that. So we did that. I did that for probably another 2 years, I guess, of playing clubs and just doing all sorts of, just gigs that weren't quite stadiums,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
great experience nonetheless. And listening to that band every night was just a treat.
I'll bet, man. Playing great music. And then, and
Oh
I
yeah,
think when I first met you, I think you were working for Mickey Curry. Does that sound right? In the late 80s?
that would have been well. That would have been. I got hard to Mick for Mick on. I was out in BC. I had moved out from Toronto to British Columbia
Yeah.
as a production manager for a government project, which was called Music 91. So they moved me out there. I was thinking I'd just go do the gig and then probably end up back in Toronto eventually. I got out there and I had all sorts of artists, MC Hammer, Bob Hope, Tony Bennett, all these different artists were on the shows that I did throughout the summer. And when we got to the second last show that I had, which was in a Soyuz, British Columbia, Bryan Adams was on the show. He was the artist of the day. So, and he had just finished recording Waking Up the Neighbors, which ended up, going on to be a massive, massive record. Everything I do for you, all that stuff, all
Yeah.
those,
Okay. Yeah.
key songs. So he was just gearing up to do that tour, which was scheduled to be a couple of years long. And they needed a drum tech. The other guy wasn't interested in coming back or whatever. And I had Bryan Adams out in '83. They were the support act on the Journey tour on a lot
Right.
of those dates. So we knew each other from that. But back then it wasn't Mickey playing drums. First time I met Mickey was Hall & Oates, and I was with Corey Hart, Sunglasses at Night, Corey Hart.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
were doing a lot of Hall & Oates shows in the United States. And Mickey was the drummer at that time. Him and G.E. Smith were still in the band. And that's where I met Mickey for the first time. But then we got reconnected when I got hired to do the tour in '91. And I was with him for 9 great years. I
Yeah.
love Mickey. He's such a great friend. I just talked to him the other day. He's doing well. But him and I got very, very close.
That's great, man. Yeah. Mickey, I love that
And
guy.
such a cool guy, man.
Yeah.
He's the funniest guy you'll ever talk to in conversation.
Yes.
I mean, he's part comedian, but he is just such a wonderful guy and such a killer player.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Absolutely.
we're
Yeah.
good friends. Good friends.
That's great, man. Well, that's when I think that's when I must have been early '90s when I first met you through working for Mickey and and all those years later
Yeah.
and you so from there basically you went from that to working for Neil. Was there something in between?
Oh
Um,
no, there was. I got hired. Well, I was still with him. Yes. Later on, Bryan started doing a lot more sporadic touring. So there was other things I had done during that period, which people called me up to do. One was Van Halen.
oh, okay.
What happened there was the tour manager for Rush, Liam. He, Rush were off the road, so they were allowed to go out and get other jobs when they weren't needed. So he got hired by Van Halen to go out as the accountant. And I think tour manager or one of the tour managers. And John Douglas had done the Australia leg of it. This was with Gary Sharon. This was Van Halen 3, as they called him.
Yeah, yeah.
And JD had done Australia, and he had previous things that he needed to do. I think something to do with his art. So he wasn't able to do the the remainder of the tour, which would have been the US and Europe eventually. And so I got the call from Liam, asked if I was available. And at that point, like I said, Bryan was doing a little bit more sporadic touring at the time. So I had space to be able to do it. So I went down.
Cool.
In fact, I knew that I was going to have a whole year, and that would have been 98, if I remember right. So I did that. There was other things that I did
Yeah.
through that period. Van Halen was probably the longest one. It lasted for about a year. But then in 91, actually in 90, I was still with Bryan, but I was getting kind of bored. I didn't want to leave Mickey, but there was just not enough for me to do.
Mm-hmm.
And
No, I understand.
so I got a call once again in, it would have been 80 or 97. I went out as a second carpenter on the Test for Echo Rush tour. So I went out just to set up the props, do anything a tour carpenter does.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure whether that was them working me kind of into the fold of eventually taking care of Neil or not. I'm not sure what was happening back then between his previous tech and Neil. But I was working on the tour nonetheless. So that was great. That happened for a summer. Then I went back to Bryan. We had shows. And then in 90, Liam called me again. And this was after the first tragedies that happened to Neil with his wife and his daughter. First of all, his daughter and then his wife. And they weren't sure when he was going to be interested in coming back or if he was. Nobody wanted to pressure him to do anything. So they were kind of on hold, but they decided to book a studio in Toronto. And, they called me and asked, because I've taken care of all instruments over my career. I can do any of the stuff, keyboards, guitars. I did more guitars than anything for the longest time, but I could also do the drums. So they brought me in and took care of all the equipment during the recording session in Toronto. And that lasted a year.
Yeah.
So, and it was a great year of getting back together again and just, we were ready for when Neil was ready, kind of thing. Which eventually happened, 2 months into it, and we started working hard, and we got that record done. And then there was actual talk of going out and touring that record. And once Neil was good with the idea, they just said, well, it only makes sense for you to take care of Neil. And I went, absolutely. So
Wow.
that's where it started.
Man. Well, and would that
And
tour?
I never looked back after.
Yeah, I know, no kidding. And I remember seeing you guys in 2002. In fact, it was in June. I don't know if you remember this specifically, but you guys did a show at Mohegan Sun or one of the places in Connecticut. Jim McGathy and I came down because ahead of that time, I had reached out to you because we wanted to put Neil on a Zildjian box set with like his picture with Buddy Rich and Gene Krupa. And so I emailed you.
I
I didn't
remember
have,
that.
remember that? Yeah, you were the guy. You
Yeah.
were the conduit. I sent it to you. You forwarded it to Neil, and then next thing I
Yep.
know, Neil's emailing me directly, and we're communicating. And you had Jim and I come down to Connecticut, presented him with some mock-ups of it, and that was an incredible meeting with him. And I remember the significance of it because it was the year that he turned 50. He was born in 52,
Mm-hmm.
so it was
Yeah.
2002. But this was in June, and I know his birthday is September. And driving home, Jim and I heard on the radio that John Entwistle had passed away, which was just this freaky. Like we're coming home from seeing you guys, and we're like hearing the radio, this tragic news. But my point to all this is, I feel like you had been with him just a little bit of time at that point. And I'm not just saying this because I'm talking to you right now, Lorne, but you made it so easy to take care of things like that guys like me from the industry side were looking to do. You were a great conduit. I think we had a couple of back and forths where you forwarded some messages and forwarded some things, and then I think Neil just kind of said, "I'll take it from here" or something, and it was a great memory that I have of working with him. So
Well, he liked to be hands on with everything like that, except for uh, if he had other things that was on his mind that he needed to deal with.
Yeah.
And that's where I took over. That's to me, if you're working with a client, you're there for him,
Sure.
and whatever
Yeah.
else might come to you, not necessarily a management position, but you're there as maybe a right hand person, assistant, whichever. It kind of all goes together, right? When you're working with a client. So,
Sure. Yeah.
but I don't mind doing that because I like to be involved in what I'm going to be doing, because eventually I'm going to be working with whatever product he may be talking to somebody about, or if they need input. That's
Right.
why I'm there. So I'm the
I
one
def
that's going to be working with it. So
Yeah, yeah, and I definitely got that sense that he really enjoyed having you be part of that whole process too, knowing that he had somebody he could, that has been around, you know people, products, the industry. Um, and I have to think that made his life that much easier too, just to know that he had you to sort of lean on in those situations. And um, so when you got the call to work for Neil full time, 20 some odd years ago. How was that? Did it feel like, I can only imagine it must have felt like you'd sort of come home in a lot of ways, that you were working with, one of the absolute greatest drummers that has ever walked the earth. Someone who's known to be so dedicated and, I use the word meticulous, but in a good way, someone who's very, very, um, well, meticulous, I guess, for lack of a better word, and you're like his go-to guy. Did you ever feel pressure from that, or did you feel that did you ever feel that there was something that you couldn't handle, or anything like that?
well, it was back with the family that I loved from the '70s.
Yeah,
So it was a little easier to slip back into it. There was different people around, for the most part. There was management people that weren't there anymore, and a couple of the guitar tech, or one of the guitar techs was still there from the old days, as well as the keyboard tech. Tony was there, so it was it was kind of full circle, going back to the family that I originally loved from the '70s and '80s. So that made it a little easier. Of course, I felt pressure. I think if you don't feel pressure, um, with a high end gig like I had, like I
yeah,
was coming into, which was, the first thing I saw was a bunch of drum cases with a whole bunch of oddball hardware, and a drum set that really hadn't been loved in quite a while, which was the Red Sparkle Vapor Trails kit. And so that was dumped on me in the studio, and drum boards and everything screwed in, and I'm going, okay, I have no idea what's going on here, because I never really examined it when I was out as the carpenter and watching Larry work every day. Everyone, I'd drop by and stuff, but I really didn't take a real close look at everything. I knew how it was different from other kits, because there was no tripods, there was no conventional hardware or anything like that. But this was all dumped on me, so I was the only one there, as well as trying to get all restringing, 50 of Alex's guitars and 6 of Ged's basses, and I'm trying to put this drum set together. And when he finally came in, a couple of weeks later, after I had many days of being able to try and get it properly set up, he came in and sat down, and he said, uh, I don't know. I think it's right. So, because he hadn't played in quite a few years. So, but no, it was, the pressure was always there. I put pressure on myself.
yeah.
Uh, that's just how I roll. But I think um, I want things perfect, and that's how I run myself. I want it perfect.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm my worst enemy sometimes. That's the
I
problem.
Knowing you, I would think that too. That I would see the pressure coming from your own desire for it to be perfect, all the time, and not any pressure that Neil himself is putting on you, but just like you say, that you want it to just be right. By the way, I just have to quickly tell you that a whole bunch of your friends are watching, and say hello. John Tempesta, Dave Aberzees, our old buddy Ron Dunnett, who was on a couple of weeks ago, as you may or may not know, who
I saw him. He was awesome.
he was great, right? And he referred to you as
Yeah.
the professor's professor, which I love. That's that's a Ron, that's a Dunnett
Okay.
ism for sure. Yeah. But anyway,
Yeah.
everybody says hello and they send their love to you. Popular guy, Lorne.
Back
Yeah.
at him.
Cool.
Back at him.
So all those years, I just I think about, uh, I mean, just the the gig that you had working with Neil, and the closeness that you guys have, and I want to say I'm so sorry, even a couple of years later, that he's not with us anymore, and I know that was had to be a really really hard thing for you and the guys in his inner circle, guys and gals, and I I think I speak for millions of people around the world, that it was just it just such a, even now it's just such a loss. It's just such a huge kind of void. He filled such a great big space in the drum world. um, but
Well,
you
he outlived the deadline that they gave him. When he was diagnosed. It's interesting because
mm,
I was getting on a plane the next day, to come out and celebrate his birthday, and I got a phone call from his assistant, and I was shocked, and it was tough, and so I
yeah,
went out there, and we were there when he came out of the surgery, and um, all his close inner circle friends, and we dealt with it. He was in the best of hands that he could ever have been in, with the surgery, the surgeons, and everybody at Cedar Sinai, and but it was absolute shock, because it was only a year before that we called it quits, and he had all these plans, and
yeah,
all of a sudden this shit's happening. So it was tough, but
yeah, yeah,
he outlived the expectancy that you know, they were giving him all sorts of. It's only going to be so long, and 3.5 years later, he's still fighting, man. And I saw
incredible.
him
Yeah,
just before he passed, and it was some of the saddest things I've ever seen. And but man, he was the strongest guy I've ever met in my life. Um, and yeah, big loss, and a big loss of a good friend.
I know. I was just going to say, the little that I knew him, he strikes me as someone that was tough mentally too. Like that. It's the only way I can
Absolutely.
describe it, right? I mean, I think of two situations where two of our mutual friends had passed away, and after after he had left Zildjian and we didn't have a business relationship anymore. A couple of years later, I saw him at Ian Wallace's memorial service. Drummer Ian
Yeah.
Wallace out in L.A.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget this, Lorne. So they had this beautiful service. Jackson Browne was there, and Mick Fleetwood, and a whole bunch of Ian's friends and family. His wife Margie put this together, and I'm in this room. I might have been talking to his wife, and this person comes by me pushing a cart. He's got a baseball hat on. Big guy, husky guy, solid looking guy comes by me, stops, turns, and looks at me. It's Neil. And he's you would have thought he was part of the catering crew. And he stopped to say
Yeah.
hello, and he said, you know how he was, and he said, so nice of you to come all this way, for Ian. Um, he really thought the world of you, or something like that. And we chatted for a minute, and then he said, I, I can't hang around. I'm on catering duty. And I see him later, like picking up empty cups. And I'm going, this guy's unbelievable. You know, I mean, he was just so selfless. And then a few years later,
Yeah.
it had to be, this would have been around 2011. Um, his, and our mutual friend Freddie Gruber passed away. And they had a little get together at the Sportsman's Lodge in LA. And I flew out for that. And Neil was sort of like an MC for this tribute that they were doing. People were coming up and speaking, and I'll never forget this again. I was standing outside chatting with some people, and he came over. Really, kind of went out of his way to come over and say hello. And I'd seen him. I didn't want to bother him because he was like running this whole thing and organizing it. And I didn't want to get in the way. I just at some point I figured I'd just say hello to him, wave to him. And he came over. He made it a point to come over and say, again, I was hoping you'd come out for this. I know you and Freddie were really close, and um, it's great that you're here. But he had a smile on his face. I guess the only way I can explain this, and that's why I said he was such a strong man, is he wasn't sitting there being sad. He was just thinking all the, and when he spoke of all the funny things and good things. Um, and I thought, man, I want to be like that too. I want to remember my friends in a happy way, in a positive way, and not be sad about things, and kind of like I am right now. But so I
Yeah.
really admired that about
Well,
him, his strength.
he was a rock. He really was a rock. He went through the tragedies in the 90s, and obviously he brought something from that. Um, Heck, he
Yeah,
took off and on his bike, and he wrote an amazing book through those travels, and he is a rock, and such a big brain on the guy. He was
yeah,
just a very, very interesting human being, and who just happened to be an incredible drummer that would write his parts that would be like no one else's parts.
yeah,
Um, and he
yeah,
spent a lot of time doing that. He took it very, very seriously.
yeah. No doubt.
But at the same time, he was a load of the laughs too.
Yeah, yeah,
we
exactly.
we had
Yeah,
a lot of fun times. We'd have these long drum rehearsals. We'd go in and at drum channel, and we'd rent the studio out for a month, and we'd be in there for the whole month, just him getting his hands together and me programming or doing some kind of maintenance on anything, and usually it was with a brand new drum set. But we'd spend a lot of time, and then it was the old, we'd rehearse to rehearse,
yeah,
because we'd go from there to band rehearsals, which would sometimes be 4 months long. And then we'd go into an arena or a venue that we could hang the production in, and we'd do another 2 weeks. So altogether, before we even do one show in front of the punters, was 2.5 months before we even saw an audience.
wow,
So they
yeah.
were very serious at what they were doing, and they didn't want to go out there looking bad.
That
So
explains a lot. That
it
explains
was we
why.
spent a lot of we
Yeah,
spent a lot of time in the room at drum channel together, just him
yeah.
and me, ordering lunch. Don would order lunch, and we'd go to the Olive Garden with John Good
Yes.
as often as he wanted to. And but we really got close doing that, and it was such a great experience.
Yeah. I had Don Lombardi on this show with me about a year ago, in fact, and he told that story about how you guys would be, in lockout in the studio, and Neil would rehearse to rehearse, like so that by the time he
Yep.
got with Getty and Alex, he had all his shit down. Like it was like he was just. Then it was just a question of the band, which is so cool. Like he wasn't going to go there unprepared, um, and then potentially take more time to have to rehearse with the band. He had all his parts there, and like let's just tighten it up. Let's just get in the zone.
Well, I mean, before we would even go there, he would be sending. We'd be doing a lot of email communicating between the three of us, or Ged, Alex, and Neil and myself. because I would be the first one that would be part of the rehearsals. So they would send me the set list that they were throwing around, on trying to agree on what and what. So I would make a song list on CD, and we'd just use a little Discman. And so that's how he worked to get his hands back in order and to get back in shape. We would just play the album tracks on the CD, and he would play to that. So it was always exactly like the record.
Wow. And with the drums,
And that's why
yeah, you didn't remove the drum
he
tracks. He
didn't,
just
no,
played.
no,
Yeah.
no. Yeah. He just
Wow.
played along.
That's awesome.
And that's how we did it, and yeah, we'd 5-day work weeks, and 4 weeks of that. And by that point, he was sick of playing drums. but he would go into we'd usually move from the West Coast to Toronto, because Toronto, Geddy and Al would always win the coin toss if we were going to do band rehearsals or production rehearsals. It's only once when I was there that we did it on the West Coast, and it was only because we were going into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. But usually it happened out here in Toronto, so we would move everything across the country, and we'd start band rehearsals, and we'd do another 4 weeks of that. And there was still, arguing to be done between them all at what was right. But at least we had the time and the BPMs, and everything was locked in. So it was us against the other two guys on what it was like for every song, and what the speed was, and this and that. And so we had it right from the record. So we were right.
Yeah. Hey, speaking of BPM, so probably a lot of Neil's fans might already know the answer to this question. I'm going to ask you though. Did Neil, like, were the songs all synced up to a click live, or did he just use like a metronome just to count the song off?
No.
Yeah.
See, the only time he had anything that was close to a metronome was a sequencer. Okay. No, we weren't playing tracks like so many bands do nowadays.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't think so.
They triggered everything on the stage. I mean, Geddy was like an octopus over there, between bass, singing, keyboards, Taurus pedals. The guy was an octopus, and that's why it was so difficult for him to get it right during rehearsals, because he had so much going on.
Yeah.
And Neil had samples that he was hitting, that he was triggering. Alex had Taurus pedals that he was triggering. But no, never click tracks. The only click track would be a sequencer that would be part of whatever song, but there wasn't always. No. Neil, this just would it would be in his brain by that 4 weeks of constant playing to the record, and then playing to a click track during band rehearsals that we had from the BPMs from the original recorded songs. So we'd keep them on a leash.
Yeah.
For getting that right. So he would play with a click during rehearsals with the band, and we had those BPMs from the actual record.
So when it came time,
so they should have been all.
Yeah. So when he would do these songs live, he just those BPMs were just like in the ether. They were in his brain at that point. Yeah. He just knew.
Yep.
It was going to be 128. He had that in his zone. Yeah.
Yep.
That's what I thought.
Plus, you had to really have that down, because we'd have sequencers flying in and out every once in a while. So if something was to come in and it was off, it was obviously up to Tony to trigger that, to bring it on, or there was a Taurus pedal. But if anything, if there was a mess up, it was probably either Ged or Al that might have been a hair off or whatever.
Yeah.
But you can deal with that kind of stuff if it's just that slight. But no, there was no clicks going on, no, none of that stuff. So, and there's so much of it that goes on now. So,
I know, and Kathleen Kelly, by the way, our dear friend Kathleen Kelly says hello.
Oh,
Kelly,
hi, Cliff.
Kathleen Kelly Shue. Didn't want
Yes,
didn't want to forget her. Um,
wonderful product.
oh, love it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I used to I used to do a version of that in the old days with aircraft cable, and just a we try and hook this thing up so that it was in a sweet spot in the bass drum. In fact, I remember one of Neil's kits having that at one point, so I'm not sure whether it was uh, Robert Scoville, their front of house guy back in the time, or what. But it was just killer trying to get this stuff in a happy place in the bass drum, and you're bloodied and everything. But the Kelly Shoe system is the best.
It is.
I
Yeah.
find I use, as soon as if I get hired by somebody, I got bass drums, I immediately call them. So, and everybody's usually happy with it.
That's great. Well, take note of that, everybody watching. Kelly Shoe System. I have to tell you,
Absolutely.
our dear friend Lenny DiMuzio's daughter, Therese, I'm sure you know Therese. Everybody
Trace.
knows, of
Yes.
course, is sending warm thoughts and love to Lorne. And I was going to say, I can't think of Neil without thinking of Lenny, and I can't think of Lenny without thinking of Neil. And I remember the last time I
True.
saw you guys live, which would have been the fall of 2002. Uh, we Lenny came with Jim McGathy and myself to the Boston Garden. You guys were playing there, and
Yeah.
I
I remember
remember
that.
how you remember that, yeah. And we presented Neil with like
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
Zildjian Award. You remember that?
Yeah.
Um,
Sure.
and he was very appreciative, and he was very sincere. And then once he saw Lenny was with us, that like made him happier than anything. You know what I mean? It was like his old
Yeah.
friend was there with him, and he said we took a picture. I think we all took a picture, and then he said to me, how about one of just the two old of the old guard or something of him and Lenny?" And it was this this beautiful picture of him and Lenny. Um, but
Well, I was just blown away. I made it into Lenny's book, which
yes,
I was completely blown away with. And I was just so honored
well, of course you should be in
because
there, Lauren. Come
he's
on.
just he's a monster in the drum industry. He was just so fantastic, and he was everywhere, and he was very, very loved.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Lenny was a character.
if you're the professor's professor, Lenny was the rock star's rock star. And that was something Bill Morgan said at Lenny's service, which I thought was beautiful. He was the rock star to the rock stars, and he really was. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, he was
yeah,
an incredible guy. Just
and very close to Billy too. So
yeah, yep,
they were very close.
yeah. Man, I just want to congratulate you on just the incredible body of work that you have going back, 50 years basically. And let's not forget, most recently you've been working with my good friend Eric Singer and the Kiss
Yeah,
guys, which Eric's certainly no slouch. That must have been a lot of
he's a
fun.
wonderful guy. We've
Yeah.
gotten very close. Taking this time away from it. I didn't want to do it, but I had to for physical and mental reasons. I had just gotten COVID before going down to South America on the last run down there few months ago now. And it just was really difficult for me to keep going. So I had to do this. We brought in somebody else to sub in for me. It's not necessarily a retirement that I think retirements are for uh, athletes and money fat CEOs. Um, they're about the only ones that can afford to retire comfortably. But in this business, it's hit or miss, but I decided to do it. It was a difficult situation, or a decision, I should say. But Eric's over in Europe. We keep in contact. I still do certain things for him to make sure that he's supplied with what he needs. Um, I started the gig, and I'm going to end the gig in whatever way.
Yeah.
But I needed to take this time and take the summer off watch my Blue Jays on TV and play some golf and just do normal stuff for a change. So I don't miss being over in Europe where they are right now, but at the same time, I'm always thinking about them.
Yeah,
we've become very, very good friends, and I enjoy working with him. He's such a great guy. He's such a great dude,
he sure is.
and I miss him.
Yeah,
But right now, it's time for myself and for Charlene, and I'm happy that I'm home.
me too,
I
Lorne.
really
Yeah,
am.
I mean, you've certainly put the time in on the road, and it's not a bad thing to have a summer off, which I know.
Especially now with
Yeah,
how screwed up the travel is and everything. It's
yeah,
just so much more difficult nowadays since the pandemic hit, and we got shut down for all those different times, and we tried to do shows. We did one in Dubai on New Year's. That went off great, but at the same time, it was so difficult to get out there and do it properly, and it's still difficult to do it because people are still coming down with COVID out there,
yeah,
and it's not gone. It's not going to. It's not going to be gone for a while.
right.
I don't think it's ever going to be gone. To be honest with you, I think we're going to be getting boosters for a long time.
I think so. And
But
you mentioned
I thought
offline.
it was a good time to. It was a good time for me to not do it. It's perfect now because I'm hearing about all these other nightmares of people travels and stuff like that, and I'm going.
Yeah,
I'm happy to not be doing it right now.
yeah, exactly. No, I hear you.
I
And it's
really, I really am.
nothing wrong with being home for the summer too, and the nice weather and all
No,
that brings.
oh, it's perfect.
Yeah.
It's
I was going
perfect.
to say, you mentioned off
I love
when
it.
we were offline that, the news of Mick having COVID and the Stones having to cancel some shows in Europe. And you probably heard Ringo, two members in Ringo's band, Steve Lukather and Edgar Winter. So they've had to put
Yeah,
their show back, all their remaining shows back into September. So you're right. I mean, it's out there. It's still affecting
you can't
business and
you can't keep away from it. You can go into as tight a COVID bubble as you can. Uh, on Kiss, we tried doing that, and it just got really ugly when we were like
yeah,
last year when we actually lost somebody. One of our guys died of it, and it's
sorry.
just such a horrible thing, man.
Yeah,
But it's still out there, and it will be out there. You'll be hearing about this on tours all over the place. It doesn't matter how much of a bubble you have, somebody's there's a good chance somebody's going to get it, and it
yeah,
can spread like that. This Omicron thing,
right.
which is really sad. But it's the touring business. The touring industry is so different right now. You're kind of on thin ice a lot of the times. You really have to watch your back.
Yeah. Well, we're getting close to you're getting close to be let off the hook on on this little chat we're having, but I want to jump back for a second. I meant to sort of do this when we were talking about Neil, um, but I was going to ask you to maybe. I think people watching, I think would enjoy hearing kind of what an average day on the road was like with on tour with Rush, working for Neil. Like what your day, you know, loading in at the venue, and then some of the things you did to get prepped for the gig, whether it's changing heads. I'd like to know.
Well, it depended. The R40 tour, which was the final tour, was a little different because I had three drum sets. I had the R40, and then I had El Darko, which was a throwback to the old Slingerland kit with the orchestra chimes and the timbales, and
Right.
going back into the early days because the show digressed from modern songs or the recent songs back into
Hmm.
the stone age of the playing in the high schools. So the show ran like that with props and as I said, two different drum sets. The third drum set was the warm up kit that was always in his dressing room.
Yeah.
But so that would have been a little different. But I still had to set all those drums up on the last tour. Beforehand, when I only had the drum set, the revolving drum set on the stage, I would show up. I'd go in and I'd set up the warm up kit, which is a 5-piece DW kit in his dressing room, and then I would have to wait for lighting to go up because Howard always had a huge lighting rig, and I set up only in the middle of the stage. So unless that lighting rig was up in the air, I could not really do much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So once the lighting rig was up in the air, I had built the riser, the revolving riser, and then I'd start screwing hardware in, and when heads needed to be changed, I'd change them. After he studied with Freddie, there was less and less of doing that because he wasn't playing through the drums so much as he was in the earlier days. So he was really conscious of heads, and the longer we could use the heads, the happier he was, which is good. They settle.
Mm-hmm.
Brand new heads all the time. You don't really get the best out of it. But I would change whatever heads need to be done, clean cymbals, do the wiring for all the electronics. This is when I had the 360 kits, and then I would wait for sound check. And Neil would, I could probably go out, and to the minute he would be coming in on his motorcycle to the bus. He had it down perfectly when he would arrive. So I would go out there, say hello. He'd be in working on his next map of the next day's travel. And then we'd do sound check. Always did sound check. And then break for dinner, and then do the show, and then tear it all down.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
the last show, or the last tour, had a lot more gear because I had 2 massive drum sets, and I had some help by some of the crew guys just to expedite everything going quicker, so the whole production would move out of the building quicker. But I had my hands full, a lot of cymbals to clean. I always did everything myself. I didn't feel comfortable with other people doing anything for me. So like I said earlier, I'm my worst enemy for that kind of stuff. I'm very particular in how I do my things.
I understand.
So,
Yeah, you want to.
but that was a typical day. That was a typical day.
And did he like his cymbals cleaned for every show? Like he liked them to be?
I liked them.
You liked him that way. No, that's
of
cool.
course he liked it that way because he always had it that way.
Yeah.
I like a squeaky clean looking drum set, and everybody that I've worked for, the only couple of guys that I haven't that I've held off cleaning cymbals were Keith Carlock and Steve Smith. They're they like a worn in K, and I didn't have it in my heart to clean them because they're those kind of guys that don't like it done. And I totally understand.
Yeah.
When a cymbal breaks, you put up a new one. But no, Neil never had a problem with having a very clean drum set. And we always had such beautiful drum sets built by DW that you want to have them clean and looking special,
Sure. Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
but I enjoyed my work, and I took it seriously.
I know you did. And one last question too. Did Neil have like a regular warm up routine before each gig? Did he have a set exercise or exercises that he did to warm up?
Yeah, 20 minutes exactly
20
on
minutes
a warm up kit. Yeah,
on
and
an
he
actual
did.
kit.
Yeah, a 5-piece kit that I
room.
had in the dressing room.
Gotcha. Okay.
Single rack, 2 floors. I'd move the floors around every once in a while, different sides, to try something different, but it was always 20 minutes long. It was set. And a little bit of it was the solo, little bits of the solo thrown in that he would do that night. But it was pretty much always the same. He kind of did everything that he needed to with the chops during that period. And he would do it 15 minutes before the show started. So he was nice and warmed up by that point.
Yeah. That's great. Well, Lorne, this has been amazing. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this today. And
thank you, John. I really enjoyed it, man. And it's great to see you.
It's great to see you too, buddy. It is. And I'm on behalf of everybody watching. I know you know, this has been a highly anticipated show by the number of people I know that turned out to watch it. So thank you so much. And I want to tell everybody, remind you all that Modern Drummer has a book, a Neil Peart Legend Series book that you can buy from Modern Drummer, with incredible pictures and interviews and a lot of the stuff Lorne's been talking about. So meant to mention that at the beginning, but I'll mention it now. So check out Modern Drummer's Legend Series Neil Peart book. And Lorne, thank you so much, brother. It's so good to see you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, John. And thanks for everybody that watched. And everyone take care out there.
All
Love
right.
you, buddy.